I still remember the exact feeling of the fabric under my fingertips that morning. It was a normal Tuesday, nothing special, nothing dramatic, nothing that should have changed my life. I was cleaning out the front hallway closet, the same one I had cleaned 100 times before, when I reached into the pocket of my husband's winter coat. I thought I'd find the usual things he left behind. A gum wrapper, maybe a receipt, sometimes a couple of coins he didn't bother to take out. But instead, my fingers closed around something cold, smooth, and unmistakably round. A ring. A wedding ring. But not his, and certainly not mine. For a moment, I just held it there in my hand, feeling the shape of it pressing into my palm, like a secret I hadn't asked for. A secret that suddenly belonged to me. Whether I wanted it or not, I didn't know what to think. My breath froze in my chest, and I swear I heard my heartbeat in my ears. It was such a small thing, just a piece of metal, but the weight of it was enormous. At first, I told myself it must have been nothing. Maybe he found it. Maybe someone dropped it, and he meant to return it. But the longer I stared at it, the harder it became to believe any of those comforting lies. The ring looked too new, too polished, too carefully kept to be found. And worst of all, it looked like a woman's ring. Thin band, delicate engraving, the kind you choose thoughtfully, lovingly. I sat down on the edge of the closet shelf and kept turning it between my fingers. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, not me. I've always been the kind of woman who tries to see the good in people, especially in the man I promised to love. But as I turned that ring over and over, my mind betrayed me, pulling up memories, small details, little moments that I had ignored. His sudden late nights, his phone always face down. The new cologne he said, a coworker recommended. The soft humming under his breath whenever he got a message he wouldn't show me. Still, I whispered to myself, there must be an explanation. But even then, deep down, I felt something cracking inside me. A tiny fracture in the trust I had built over years. The kind of crack that starts small but grows until it splits everything open. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. The ring still tight in my grip, I placed it on the counter and just stared at it. The kitchen, my safe place, suddenly felt foreign. The soft hum of the refrigerator sounded too loud. The tick of the wall clock felt like it was taunting me, counting down to a truth I didn't want to uncover. I kept asking myself, why was this ring in his coat? Who did it belong to? And why? Why hide it? I remembered the night before, how he had come home late, smiling in that way he does when he's hiding something. Not an obvious smile, a soft one, almost shy. I had asked how his day was, and he told me busy, just busy. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. I trusted him, I always trusted him. But now I felt like a fool for not noticing sooner. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. Don't overthink it, I said out loud. There's a reason. There has to be. But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't normal. A second wedding ring in my husband's coat pocket. No woman should find that and remain calm. I picked it up again and examined the inside of the band. I expected it to be blank, maybe scratched from use, but instead there was a tiny inscription, a date. Just a date. No name, no message, no initials. But the date was recent, too recent. Weeks ago, not years. That's when a strange nausea twisted in my stomach. Because there's something particularly cruel about seeing a date, just a date, etched into a secret ring. It's intimate, it's planned, it's meaningful to someone, and it wasn't meaningful to me. I closed my eyes and let myself breathe through the first wave of panic. When I opened them again, the kitchen looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. Something fundamental inside me had shifted. The foundation of trust I'd always relied on suddenly felt fragile. Like old wood beginning to rot underneath my feet, I needed answers. I needed to breathe. I needed something, anything. So I did what I always do when I'm overwhelmed. I made tea. I went to the cupboard, filled the kettle, turned on the stove. The ordinary routine helped slow my racing thoughts. But while the water heated, I kept glancing back at the ring on the counter, like it was alive and watching me, like it was waiting for me to ask the question I had been avoiding. Who did he buy it for? The kettle whistled loudly, too loudly, jolting me out of my daze. I poured the hot water, added a spoonful of honey and lemon, and sat at the table. The steam curled upward slowly, swirling like the mess inside my chest. I wrapped my hands around the mug, using the heat to ground myself. I tried to imagine a scenario that didn't end with heartbreak. Maybe he bought it as a surprise for me. No, that made no sense. We had matching rings, and this one certainly didn't match. Maybe it was a gift for his sister? No, she didn't wear rings. Besides, he would have told me. We told each other everything. Or, at least, I thought we did. I looked around our home, our photos on the walls, our life built together. And suddenly, everything looked suspicious, like all of it was part of a set, carefully arranged to hide something real, lurking just out of sight. I remembered the last time he looked at me with genuine warmth. It had been weeks, maybe months. Instead, lately, his expressions felt distant, detached, like he was always thinking about something else, someone else. And now, sitting in our kitchen with that strange ring staring back at me, I couldn't avoid the truth anymore. Something had been wrong for a long time. Long before today, I stood up, unable to sit still. I paced across the kitchen tiles, my bare feet making soft sounds against the cold floor. Every step seemed to echo the same thought. What else has he been hiding? The more I paced, the more the ring became a symbol of everything I didn't want to face. It was the physical proof of a story I wasn't ready to read. And yet, here it was. At some point, I realized I couldn't keep this to myself. I needed, not comfort, not reassurance, but clarity. I picked up my phone and hovered my thumb over my best friend's name, but I didn't call. I couldn't. Not yet. Because saying the words out loud, "I found another ring in my husband's coat," would make it too real, too final. So instead, I did something quiet, something small, something completely unlike me. I put the ring back in his coat pocket. Maybe I wasn't ready to confront him. Maybe I wanted to see if he'd mention it. Maybe I wanted to see if he'd reach for it. Or maybe part of me wanted to pretend I had never found it at all. But as soon as I placed it back into the pocket, I felt a tear slip down my cheek. Not because of the ring itself, but because of the woman I suddenly realized I had become, a woman who was scared of the truth. I closed the closet door softly and leaned my forehead against it. "Please," I whispered, though I don't know if I was talking to the universe or myself. "Let me be wrong." But deep down, I already knew the truth. The moment I found that ring, the moment my fingers brushed against its cold surface, my life had already begun to change. The crack in my trust had already started spreading. And even though I tried to ignore it, to delay the inevitable, I knew this was the moment everything quietly began to fall apart. Looking back now, it's almost embarrassing how many signs were right in front of me. Quiet signs, soft red flags, the kind that don't scream, they whisper. And because they whispered, I convinced myself not to hear them. But once I found that ring, the whispers suddenly became louder, sharper. They echoed through every memory I had ignored, every moment I brushed off as nothing. And with each recollection, I realized the truth had been nudging me long before it finally crashed into my life. It started with something small. So small I wouldn't have remembered it if not for the ring. About 3 months before, he had changed his phone password, not in a big dramatic way. He didn't hide in a corner or shield the screen. He just casually typed something new in front of me, and when the screen unlocked, I raised an eyebrow. "New passcode?" I asked. He shrugged. "Work wants stronger security." I nodded. It made sense. His job handled sensitive client data, but what didn't make sense was what came after. The way he suddenly started keeping his phone in his pocket, even at home. The way he turned it on silent, how he'd tilt the screen away from me, not enough to look suspicious, just enough to feel wrong. At the time, I convinced myself I was overthinking. Because when you trust someone, you don't question every little thing. Or at least, I didn't. But the ring made those memories feel different now. It reframed everything. I remembered another detail. He used to call me during his lunch break almost every day, just a quick hello, or to ask how my morning was. Then suddenly, he stopped. At first, he blamed it on new work hours, then meetings, then company changes. But I didn't realize that company changes meant our marriage was changing too. One afternoon, months before the ring, we were sitting on the couch watching something on TV. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, smiled, just a little smile, one that flickered in the corner of his mouth. And then he didn't open the message. He simply cleared the notification and kept watching the screen. Not our TV screen, his phone's black screen, like he was waiting. For what? I didn't know. For whom? I didn't want to ask. And then there were the nights, the late ones, the ones that crept in slowly, the ones he explained with tired excuses. Traffic was bad. We had to finish a project. Everyone stayed late. I couldn't leave early. The first few times, I believed him instantly. That's the thing about trust. It makes you generous with your assumptions. But then the late nights became frequent, predictable, strangely scheduled. He started coming home smelling different. Not perfume, not something obvious, but different in a way I couldn't put words to. Like the scent of a different room, a different place, a different life. Something outside our home. And some nights, he didn't smell like anything at all. Not cologne, not sweat, not even the office. Just nothing. A strange, too clean nothingness, as if he had scrubbed away every trace of where he'd been. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things. I remember asking, "Did you go to the gym? You smell fresh." He laughed. "Fresh is good, isn't it?" "Yeah," I said, "of course." But the truth was already trying to surface, even then. Another sign appeared on a Sunday afternoon. We were getting ready to go grocery shopping together, a small ritual of ours. I walked into the living room and found him sitting on the couch, staring at his hands. He looked lost in thought, like he'd forgotten where he was. When he noticed me, he straightened up instantly and forced a smile. "You ready?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "You okay?" "Just tired." But his eyes told a different story. They were distant, heavy, almost guilty. At the time, I didn't know what guilt looked like on his face. Now I do. Back then, though, I brushed it off. Because when you love someone, you make excuses for their shadows. And that's what all these signs were. Shadows, shadows I walked through without realizing how dark they'd become. But the biggest sign, the one I ignored most stubbornly, was emotional distance. He wasn't unkind. He wasn't cold. He wasn't angry or irritated. That would have been too easy to notice. Instead, he became gentle. Too gentle, like he was handling me with care he didn't actually feel anymore, like he was afraid of causing damage. He'd say things like, "Don't wait up for me. You don't have to cook tonight." Get some rest. I'll be late. You're good? Everything okay at home? I used to think he was looking out for me. Now I know he was easing himself away from me, like a man stepping slowly backward, making sure I didn't see him leaving. And then there was the laugh. This one still stings when I think about it. We were in the kitchen, ironic really, considering where I'd later find the ring, and I told him a story about something funny that happened at work. Normally, he'd laugh with this warm, full sound, the kind that fills the room, but that day, he chuckled, just once. A light exhale, no smile in his eyes. I remember feeling this tiny sting in my chest. Not a wound, just a prick, something small enough to ignore. But it stayed with me, because it was the first time his laugh felt like a rehearsal. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake beside him and tried to convince myself that every relationship has seasons, that maybe he was stressed, maybe I was stressed, maybe we were just out of sync. I never imagined the problem was another person. The most painful part about quiet signs is that they rely on your willingness to dismiss them. They count on your hope, your belief, your love, and I had all three. One evening, about a month before I found the ring, he came home wearing a shirt I didn't recognize. A new one. Not expensive, but new enough that I noticed. "Nice shirt," I said. "Oh," he replied, looking down. "Yeah, got it on sale." He said it casually, too casually. I reached out and touched the sleeve. It's soft. "Where's the tag?" "The tag?" "If it's new, the tag might still be in the room. I can wash it for you." "Oh no," he said quickly. "I already washed it." But the shirt smelled too new, too crisp, not washed at all. At the time, I let the moment pass without comment, because the heart picks comfort, even when the mind senses danger. Every sign, every shift, every small inconsistency. I saw them. I just didn't want to see them. But the ring forced me to look back, forced me to recenter every moment in the light of what I now feared. And suddenly, every odd behavior, every evasive glance, every distant action felt connected. I wasn't imagining things. I had been living inside a quiet unraveling. The morning after finding the ring, I noticed something new. I watched him more closely, subtly, quietly, not with suspicion, but with awareness I didn't have before he was on his phone while drinking his coffee. When I walked into the kitchen, he locked it instantly, not defensively, smoothly, like a reflex he had practiced. And then he smiled at me, a soft, polite smile. But it wasn't the smile of a man in love. It was the smile of someone building a wall. And in that moment, I felt it. That deep, uncomfortable truth I had been resisting for months. The truth that frightened me more than the ring itself. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong. Something was still wrong. But I didn't yet know how wrong. I didn't know that the signs I had ignored weren't random. They were leading somewhere, pointing to something. They were breadcrumbs on the path to a truth that would break everything. I just needed one more sign, one heavier than all the rest combined. And soon enough, I would get it. They say you can feel the moment someone stops loving you, not because they tell you, but because the silence between their words suddenly becomes louder than anything they say. For me, that shift didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, slow, like someone dimming a light so subtly that you don't notice the darkness until you're standing in it. And once I found that ring, once I had something tangible to hold on to, the memories of his fading affection, his disappearing warmth, all became clearer. They rearranged themselves into a pattern I had refused to see. I realized that the real betrayal didn't start with the ring. It started much earlier, when the way he loved me began to change. It's strange how a person can be close enough to touch, yet feel impossibly far away. That's how he became. Present in the room, gone in every other way. I remember the exact moment I felt the first crack in his affection. It was a Saturday morning. We were at the kitchen table having breakfast like we always did. I was talking about a trip I wanted us to take. Nothing extravagant, just a weekend getaway somewhere quiet, somewhere simple. The kind of break couples take to reconnect. He nodded along, stirring his coffee. But he wasn't hearing me. I could tell by the way he kept glancing at the clock. By the way his hand rested on his phone as though he was waiting for it to buzz. By the hollow way he said, "Yeah, sounds good," without looking me in the eyes. That was the first moment I felt it. A distance, unspoken, invisible, but unmistakable. I brushed it off. Told myself he was tired. Told myself he didn't sleep well. Told myself a story that hurt less than the truth. Back then, I didn't know I was trying to fill the emotional space he had already emptied weeks past. And the distance between us grew in small but undeniable ways. He used to reach for my hand on the couch. Now his hands stayed buried in his pockets. He used to wrap his arms around me in bed, even in his sleep. Now he rolled to the far edge without noticing he'd left me alone in the middle. He used to kiss me goodbye every morning. Now he gave me a quick, distracted nod. His love had once been loud, effortless, present. But now it felt like he was rationing it, as if each expression of affection cost him something he no longer wanted to spend. The shift became more obvious on nights when we sat together but barely spoke. Not because we were fighting, but because he had nothing left to give me. I remember one night particularly well. We were watching a movie, one of our favorites. A comedy we had rewatched so many times we could quote half the lines. Usually he'd laugh before the jokes even landed because he knew what was coming. But that night, nothing. He sat still, eyes on the screen, but mind far away. When I nudged him and teased, "You're not laughing," he forced a smile. "Sorry," he said, "just thinking about work." Work. It was always work. Even though his job hadn't changed, even though his hours were the same, even though the only thing that had changed was his heart. And then there were the conversations that weren't really conversations at all. I'd ask, "How was your day?" He'd respond, "Fine." "What did you do?" "Nothing special." "How's the new project going?" "It's okay." 3 words, 2 words, sometimes just one. Love doesn't disappear with a single dramatic moment. It slips away through these tiny exchanges, dry answers where affection used to be. I didn't realize it then, but he had already started living in 2 emotional worlds, and I was only part of one. Love felt different, and I kept telling myself it was stress. I didn't know it was distance. Distance created for someone else. One night I stumbled upon the truth in its smallest form. Not the big revelation, not the ring, not the confrontation, but a moment so small it should have meant nothing. We were in bed, lights off, the room quiet. I whispered, "Good night, I love you." There was a pause, longer than usual. Then he said, "You too." Not "I love you," just "you too." It was the kind of answer you give without thinking, to someone you don't want to lie to but also don't want to tell the truth. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying the moment, asking myself why it bothered me so much, why something so small felt so heavy. But deep inside, I understood, even if I didn't want to accept it. After the ring, after everything began to make sense in reverse, I saw another detail I had ignored. He had stopped looking at me. Not in an obvious way. He still faced me when I spoke, still appeared to listen, still responded politely. But the way he looked at me had changed. His eyes used to be soft when they met mine, reflective, almost warm. Now they were flat, guarded, like a person looking at a stranger they're trying not to hurt. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and catch him staring into the distance, not thoughtfully, not peacefully, but conflicted. And every time he saw me see him, he'd straighten up, clear his throat, pretend nothing was wrong. His heart was drifting. I just didn't know how far it had gone. The biggest shift, though, was in the way he touched me. He used to hug me with both arms, holding on just a heartbeat longer than necessary. Little gestures, forehead kisses, a hand on my waist, brushing hair from my face, were part of our everyday life. But as the months went on, those gestures disappeared. A kiss became a quick peck. A hug became a brief squeeze. A touch became an afterthought. One evening, we were sitting side by side on the couch, and I rested my head on his shoulder. It was natural, instinctive, something I had done 100 times. He stiffened, not dramatically, just enough for me to feel it. And that tiny reaction told me everything. His body knew a truth his mouth wasn't ready to admit. Love was slipping away, quietly, slowly, but unmistakably. And when love begins to fade, the lies begin to grow. Not spoken lies, behavioral lies, emotional lies, the kind that look like indifference but feel like loss. Looking back, the most painful realization is this. He wasn't being cruel. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying not to hurt me, because when someone is torn between guilt and affection, their kindness becomes heavy, their tenderness becomes artificial, and their every gesture becomes a negotiation between truth and shame. And I felt it every day, even when I didn't understand what it meant. The worst lie wasn't something he said, it was something he didn't say. I'm not in love with you anymore. Instead, he said nothing. Instead, he stayed. Instead, he tried to be the man he once was, a role he could no longer play. By the time the ring appeared in his coat pocket, his love had already changed months before, maybe longer. I just hadn't realized that love doesn't always end loudly. Sometimes it ends softly, in silence, in routine, in the absence of the little things that once made you feel chosen. And as I stood in our kitchen the morning after finding the ring, watching him sip his coffee with a distant face and a distracted mind, I finally felt it fully, not imagined, not suspected, the hollow space where his love used to live. I didn't confront him that morning. I didn't ask. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply watched him walk out the door, kiss me lightly on the cheek out of habit, and say, "See you tonight." He said it like he always did. But for the first time, I didn't believe him. Because love that softens into distance always leads to something, a truth, a revelation, a breaking point. And mine was coming, sooner than I ever expected. Doubt doesn't arrive like a storm. It doesn't crash through the door or shatter the windows. It seeps in, quietly, invisibly, through the cracks you didn't know existed. And on the night that doubt finally took over my heart, it didn't feel dramatic or explosive. It felt quiet, heavy, inevitable. That evening started just like any other dinner on the stove. TV humming softly in the background, the soft glow of warm lights in the kitchen. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing that should have broken the careful denial I was living in. But the truth has a way of choosing its own moment. And that night, it chose mine. He had texted earlier to say he'd be late. Again. Another meeting, another vague explanation that didn't answer anything. By then, his excuses no longer startled me. Not because I accepted them, but because I had grown used to the feeling of being placed second, or maybe third. I set the table anyway. I made dinner anyway. Not because I believed he'd be home soon, but because I was trying to hang on to the rituals that once made our life feel whole. The clock ticked louder than usual. Every minute felt like another thread unraveling from the fabric of our marriage. At 9:14 p.m., he still wasn't home. At 9:28, the food had gone cold. At 9:40, I found myself pacing, something I rarely did. Every step echoed the same question. Where is he? And worse, who is he with? I hated myself for thinking it. I hated how easily the thought came. But once doubt enters your mind, it doesn't ask permission to grow. I had ignored the signs, I had excused the distance, I had forgiven the shifts, but now the ring had rewired everything. By 10 p.m., I couldn't stay still any longer. I walked into the living room, grabbed my phone from the couch, and stared at his contact name. My finger hovered over the call button, but I didn't press it. And that was the moment I realized I didn't trust him anymore. Because when you trust someone, you call, you ask where they are, you expect the truth. But when trust is broken, you fear the answer more than the silence. Instead of calling, I sat down. The house felt colder, emptier, too quiet. I wrapped a blanket around myself and pulled my knees to my chest. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears were waiting, patient. Restrained by the weight of uncertainty, I tried to distract myself with the TV, but I kept glancing at the front door like I was expecting it to betray me, like it might swing open and reveal a truth I wasn't prepared to see. At 10:27 p.m., his phone location notification popped up on my screen. Not a spying app, not a secret tracker, just an old feature we had set up years ago for travel safety. Something innocent, something mutual, something no longer innocent at all. His phone was nowhere near work, nowhere near home. He was across town, an area he never had a reason to go to, a residential area. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stared at the map as though the screen might offer explanations. It didn't. It offered the truth, direct, unforgiving. I whispered to myself, maybe he's helping a friend. But it sounded weak, false, like a lie I was trying to sell to myself. A memory surfaced. A small one I had forgotten. Weeks earlier, he mentioned a new co-worker who had moved recently and needed help with some furniture. He had brought it up so casually, I barely listened. But now it felt suspicious, manufactured, placed. I felt my breath coming faster, sharper, not panic. Realization, the kind that sinks deep and slow, like a stone settling at the bottom of your stomach. He wasn't answering my texts. He wasn't home. He wasn't where he said he would be. And I was sitting alone in the house we built together, wondering when exactly I had stopped being his home. It wasn't the location that broke me. It was the lack of hesitation in my belief. The fact that I instantly assumed he was lying. That's how I knew doubt had finally won. At 11:09 p.m., the front door opened. He walked in with the same energy he used to carry, confident, relaxed, predictable. He hung his coat, placed his keys in the bowl, and smiled at me like nothing was wrong. "You're up," he said lightly, surprised. I stared at him, truly stared, not at his face, but at his lies. The way they sat on him like a second skin. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I asked, "Did you eat?" "Yeah," he said. "At work." Not true, not even close. But he didn't know I knew that he walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, poured himself a glass of water. His movements were casual, too casual. The practiced routine of a man expecting to be believed. And all I could do was watch. Watch the man I loved lie to me with comfort, with ease, with familiarity. He joined me on the couch, sitting close but not touching. Close enough to perform closeness, far enough to protect the lie. "Long day," he sighed. Yeah, I said softly. My voice didn't shake. It surprised me how calm I sounded, how still I felt. He leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. Not from exhaustion, but from relief. The relief of getting away with something. He didn't notice the tears building in my eyes. He didn't sense the shift in my breathing. He didn't see that I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the spaces between us, spaces he had created. I whispered, "You got home late." He nodded. "Yeah, sorry, meetings ran long." A blatant lie, delivered with ease, smooth, comfortable. That's when my heart cracked. Not because he lied, but because I saw how practiced he was at it. This wasn't his first lie. This wasn't new. This wasn't spontaneous. This was a path he had been walking for a while. A path I had been too trusting to see. When he finally fell asleep that night, I lay awake beside him. The darkness felt too heavy to breathe in. I watched him. The rise and fall of his chest, the soft lines of his face, the peacefulness he seemed to have earned at my expense. I realized something brutal. He was sleeping comfortably, while I was drowning in doubt he had created. And worse, he had no idea. Or maybe he didn't care. I turned onto my side, facing away from him, pressing my hand against my chest to steady the ache building there. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but my mind replayed every sign, every shift, every moment I ignored. And then my thoughts circled back to the ring, that ring in his coat pocket, that symbol I wasn't ready to confront him about. It suddenly made perfect sense, painful, sharp, cold sense. Doubt didn't creep anymore. It didn't whisper, it roared. And in the darkness of our bedroom, with him breathing steadily beside me as if everything was normal, I finally said the words I'd been avoiding. Only to myself, only in silence. "I think he's in love with someone else." The next morning, the world felt different. Not visually. The sun still rose, the house still stood, the coffee still brewed with its familiar warmth. But something inside me had shifted in a way I couldn't undo. It felt like waking up after a storm that destroyed a town in the night. The trees still stood, the streets still existed, but nothing felt safe anymore. Nothing felt untouched. That's what doubt does. It doesn't take everything at once. It changes the meaning of everything that's left. And that morning, as I watched my husband move around the kitchen with the same routines he'd had for years, I couldn't stop staring at his hands. His hands, the ones that used to feel like home, the ones that used to reach for me without thinking, the ones that now hid secrets, the ones that once held a ring, and now carried another one in his coat pocket. I had found a second wedding ring. My husband didn't know I knew. And every moment since then had become a silent examination of truth he wasn't telling me. He sat across from me at the table, sipping his coffee, scrolling through his phone. Normal, too normal. He didn't feel guilty enough. Or maybe he was good at pretending. He looked up and smiled casually. "Everything okay?" Everything in me wanted to say, "Number, nothing is okay. You're lying. You aren't where you say you are. You came home smelling different. You carry a ring that isn't mine and doesn't belong to any history we share." But instead I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." The lie tasted cold in my mouth, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed facts, not just suspicion. I needed truth, not the version he curated. Later that morning, after he left for work, I stood in front of the coat closet, the closet where I found the ring, the closet where the truth had first whispered its presence. I opened the door slowly, like the coat might react, like it might reveal something new. I slid my hand into the same pocket, The ring was still there, still nestled in the wool lining, still small and innocent looking, still holding the power to break everything. I held it in my palm again, letting it reflect light in a way that mocked me. It looked new, polished, unmarred, untouched. Not like a ring that had seen years of marriage, not like something bought long ago. This ring had a purpose, a destination, a meaning, and none of it pointed to me. I pressed my thumb against the band. It was smooth, no engraving, no date, no initials, clean, untraceable, like a secret someone wanted to keep. But something hit me then, hard and unavoidable. If this ring wasn't mine, and it wasn't his, and it wasn't engraved, it was a ring waiting for an answer, a proposal, a moment, a future. Not with me, with someone else. My breath shook. The room swayed slightly. I sank onto the edge of the bed, holding the ring like it was radioactive. I tried to remember every conversation we'd had in the past few months, every late night. Ever. Every late night, every canceled plan, every work emergency that pulled him away from me. The sudden gym membership, the new clothes, the increase in phone privacy, the unfamiliar scents in his car. None of it was singularly damning. Together, it was unmistakable. He wasn't slipping away. He wasn't confused or stressed or overwhelmed. He was preparing for a life without me. My chest tightened so sharply it hurt to breathe. A thought formed, quiet, dangerous, unavoidable. He's going to propose to her. I stood up so fast the ring slipped from my hand and landed on the bedspread with a soft sound that felt louder than a scream. My mind spun. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I grabbed my keys and left, not knowing exactly where I was going, only that I needed airspace, distance from everything that was suffocating me. I found myself driving to a small park near the edge of town, the one I used to visit years ago when I needed clarity, back when life felt simpler, back when he and I were still us. I sat on a bench and stared at nothing. The wind rustled the leaves. Children played nearby. People walked their dogs, sipping coffee and chatting about normal life things, groceries, school schedules, weekend plans. I watched them like I was separated by a glass wall, a world I wasn't part of anymore, a world where trust existed. My hands were clenched in my lap, my jaw tight, my throat dry. I didn't cry. Not at first. The shock was still too sharp, too fresh. It held the tears hostage. But eventually the dam cracked. The first tear fell silently, then the next, and soon I was hunched over, elbows on my knees, face buried in my hands, letting grief pour out of me, not in sobs, but in quiet, aching devastation. This wasn't heartbreak. This was betrayal. This was the death of the version of my life I thought was real. After a long while, when my tears had softened into exhaustion, I lifted my head and stared at the ground. There was something I knew I had to do, something I couldn't avoid anymore. Not confronting him, not yet, but understanding the truth. I drove home with a strange calmness, the kind that comes after emotional freefall. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing even, my thoughts painfully clear. When I stepped back inside the house, the quiet felt heavier, more hostile, more empty. I walked straight to the bed. The ring was still lying where I had dropped it. I picked it up gently, like something fragile. My mind asked a question I had been avoiding until now. What else is he hiding? That thought became a flame, a push, a tipping point. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I opened his desk drawer. Not to snoop, not out of pettiness, but because I realized something deeply painful. If he wasn't protecting our marriage, I had to protect my reality. I didn't want to find anything. I prayed I wouldn't. I hoped this would end with relief, with embarrassment, with an apology I owed myself for doubting him. But life rarely offers mercy. I found another box, small, black, velvet. My stomach twisted. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a second ring, another one not identical, not the same size, but just as new, just as untouched, just as damning. 2 rings, in 2 separate places, hidden. Panic washed over me. This wasn't just a proposal. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a plan, a decision, a path he was already walking, and I wasn't on it. Finding 1 ring broke me, finding 2. It destroyed any hope that I was wrong. I sat on the floor, both rings in my hands, my breathing unsteady. How long had this been going on? How many lies had he told? How many nights had he spent elsewhere while I sat waiting? What promises had he made her? What life was he building without me? And then a new, terrifying thought slid into my mind. What if they weren't both for the same person? I felt sick, physically sick. My vision blurred. My hands shook so violently the rings clicked against each other. 2 rings meant 2 choices, 2 paths, 2 women, or something worse. I didn't know which possibility hurt more. Suddenly it felt like every breath required effort. Every heartbeat felt wrong, too loud, too painful. And then, through the panic, a truth finally surfaced. Clear, cold, solid. Whatever his reasons, whatever his intentions, our marriage was already over. I just hadn't been told yet. I closed both rings in my fist and whispered into the empty room. I deserve to know the truth. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt strength shaking, fragile, unsteady, but strength. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat on the edge of the bed with both rings in my lap, staring at them as the hours crawled past. The room felt colder than usual. Or maybe it was me who felt cold, numb even. It's strange how a single discovery can turn your entire home into unfamiliar territory. The bed where we laughed, the dresser where we kept our shared life, the closet that once felt like it held memories instead of secrets. Everything looked the same, but nothing was familiar anymore. 2 hidden rings, not 1. 2. And a marriage that no longer felt like a marriage, just an illusion built on top of something hollow. The sky was barely gray when I heard the front door open. He was home from his late shift. He always used that phrase like a stamp, a catch-all explanation, something that didn't need further questioning. But today, I had questions. When he walked into the bedroom and saw me awake, sitting upright with both rings in my lap, his entire face changed. It wasn't shock, not at first. It was calculation. His mind shifting gears, the way someone does when they're evaluating how much damage has already been done. "Hey," he said quietly, too quietly, like he was speaking to a wounded animal that might bolt. "Why are you up?" I didn't answer. I just held up the rings. His face drained of color. He took 1 step forward, then stopped, like the rugs of his lies were suddenly being pulled out from under him, and he didn't know where to place his feet. Where did you get those?" His voice cracked on the last word. "You tell me," I said. For a moment, neither of us breathed. The air between us was tight, stretched thin by years of unspoken things that were now clawing their way to the surface. He swallowed hard. "I can explain." It was the line people use when they have no explanation at all. "No," I replied. "Not explain. Tell the truth." His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of being cornered by the truth he'd been avoiding. He sank onto the chair across from me, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "I didn't want it to be like this," he whispered. "I didn't want you to find them." "That's not an answer," I said softly. He lifted his head. His eyes were red. Or maybe they were tired. I didn't care which. "It's not what you think," I laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a bitter, broken exhale that hurt more than anything. "Really? Because I think you bought 2 wedding rings, and none of them are for me." He winced. "I wasn't cheating," he said. "Then what were you doing?" My voice cracked, not from yelling. I didn't have the energy for that, but from the weight of everything I had carried alone. He took a long, shaky breath, then another. And when he spoke again, his voice was so small it barely felt like his. "I was trying to choose." "Choose?" The word stabbed through me. "Choose between what or who?" He closed his eyes like the answer physically hurt him. "You." My heart stuttered. "And someone else." Silence. A thick, suffocating silence that filled every corner of the room until it was hard to breathe. I stared at him, unable to understand the cruelty of the sentence he had spoken so calmly. "You needed 2 rings to choose between me and her," I whispered. "You needed 2 rings to make a decision." He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't defend himself. "Why?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "What made you think I was someone you needed to choose against another woman?" His lips trembled. "I didn't plan for it to happen. I didn't go looking for anyone. I swear I didn't. It just happened." The excuses came out like well-practiced lines, lines he'd probably told himself for months. "Say her name," I said. He hesitated. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, I learned her name without him saying it. He had loved her. Maybe he still did. When he finally spoke the name, it didn't matter. It didn't matter who she was. It mattered that she wasn't me. He wasn't confused. He wasn't pressured. He wasn't lost. He had already emotionally left, and the 2 rings were proof he was preparing for what came next. I set the rings down gently on the bedspread between us. "What would you have done," I asked, "if I never found them?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. "I don't know," he whispered. I leaned forward slightly. "You do know. You bought the rings. You hid them. You had a plan. Tell me the truth." He exhaled shakily. "I was waiting." "For what?" For the moment I felt certain. A hollow feeling spread through my chest. "So I was an option," I said. "A possibility. A maybe." He shook his head violently. "No, you're my wife." "Am I?" I gestured to the rings. "To this? To the fact you were deciding whether to build a life with me or build a life with someone else?" His face crumpled. "I didn't know how to end things without hurting you." I stared at him in a silence sharper than any scream. "You were hurting me anyway," I said quietly. "You just wanted to avoid being the one who had to say it." Something in him seemed to break. Then, he covered his face with both hands and began shaking. Not the kind of shaking that comes from regret, but the kind that comes when someone realizes their carefully built lies have finally collapsed. I let him cry. I didn't reach for him. I didn't comfort him. Because I finally understood something. We weren't breaking in this moment. We had broken a long time ago, I just hadn't been told. When he finally looked up, eyes swollen, voice rough, he whispered, "I didn't want to lose you." I stared at him with a sadness so deep it felt like part of my bones. "You lost me the moment you made me an option," I said softly. His breath caught in his chest, and this time he didn't argue. He wasn't choosing between 2 women. He was choosing between 2 futures. And I wasn't his future anymore. A quiet settled between us. a quiet that wasn't tense or angry, just final. I picked up the rings one last time, feeling their cold weight. Then I placed them on the nightstand between us, not in anger, not in bitterness, in acceptance. He watched me like he didn't know what I was going to say next. And when I finally spoke, my voice was steady. Steady in a way it hadn't been since this nightmare began. "I want you to leave," I said. He closed his eyes, and a single tear slid down his cheek. "Please don't do this," he whispered. But it wasn't a plea for me. It was a plea for the person he wanted me to keep being. The woman who didn't know, who didn't question, who waited, who trusted. I wasn't that woman anymore. "Leave," I repeated, calm and unwavering. "Go stay with whoever you need to stay with. Go figure out what you want, or who you want. But don't do it here." He stood up slowly, like he was carrying the weight of his decisions for the first time. At the doorway, he turned back, eyes broken. "I'm sorry," he said, and I believed him. But apologies don't rebuild what betrayal destroys. He walked out. The door closed, and I sat alone in the silence that followed, a silence that finally told the truth. Our marriage wasn't ending in the future. It had already ended. I just hadn't seen the rings soon enough. The house felt different after he left, almost immediately, as if the air shifted the second the door closed behind him. It wasn't quieter. It wasn't emptier. It was honest. And honesty hurts. But it also frees. I didn't move for a long time. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the 2 wedding rings sitting on the nightstand. 2 symbols of 2 futures I was never meant to be part of. But eventually, a strange sensation washed over me. Not peace, not relief, just clarity. The kind that comes when there's nothing left to hide from. He wasn't choosing me. He wasn't choosing us. He had already chosen a different life. I was just the last to know. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling heavier than they should. The room looked the same bedspread, same curtains, same framed pictures of vacations that suddenly felt unreal. But the meaning of everything had changed. Memories are strange like that. They shift depending on what you learn afterward. A smile becomes a lie. A trip becomes an excuse. A kiss becomes a distraction. An anniversary becomes a performance. And I was left sorting through the emotional debris like someone trying to rebuild after a fire. Around noon, I finally stepped outside. The sunlight felt too bright, too cheerful for what my world had become. But I let it hit my face anyway. For a moment, I just breathed, deep, shaky breaths that tasted like a beginning I never asked for. I walked down the street, not to go anywhere, just to move. I needed movement. Stillness felt dangerous, like if I stayed in one place too long, the weight of everything would crush me. People walked dogs. Teenagers laughed on their way to the store. Neighbors waved from their porches. It was surreal, watching the world continue, as if I hadn't just lost the life I thought I was living. Grief is lonely like that. It happens in your chest, while the world spins around you like nothing changed. I ended up at a small cafe I used to love years ago, back when I was single, before life became complicated, before love transformed and twisted into something unrecognizable. I sat at a table in the corner, staring out the window at people who didn't look broken. The waitress came over, smiling politely. "What can I get you?" I hesitated. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want food. But I also didn't want to keep existing in that numb space between shock and reality. "Just tea," I whispered. She nodded, still smiling. A normal interaction, a tiny one. But somehow it mattered. While she walked away, I rested my hands on the table and let myself acknowledge the truth. I wasn't grieving him. Not exactly. Not anymore. I was grieving the version of myself I had been with him, the one who believed she was loved, the one who trusted, the one who didn't question, the one who didn't know she was living in a house with doors that led to other lives. My tea arrived with a small clink, steam curling into the air. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the heat ground me. For the first time since the moment I found that ring, I let myself feel something softer than pain I felt. Tired, just tired, not defeated, not destroyed, just deeply, deeply tired of carrying more than I should have ever had to carry. He left because he was already gone. I stayed because I didn't know yet. And knowing, truly knowing, was the beginning of something I couldn't name yet. Later that afternoon, I went home. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel hostile. It felt like a place waiting to see what I would do next. I walked through each room slowly, not searching for anything, just absorbing the reality of my situation. In the living room, I picked up a picture frame. It was from our anniversary, 3 years ago. Smiling in a restaurant, he chose his arm around me. My head tilted against him. I looked at the photo differently now. It wasn't a memory anymore. It was a moment frozen before I realized the truth behind it. I set it down gently, not angrily, not dramatically, just gently, like closing a chapter. I did that with several more photos, not removing them, not destroying them, just acknowledging them for what they were. Snapshots of a story that wasn't as honest as it looked. When I returned to the bedroom, the rings were still on the nightstand. 2 perfect circles. 2 promises made to someone who was never meant to receive them. I sat beside them and picked up one. It felt lighter now, somehow, as if its power over me had diminished. Then I picked up the other. Cold, smooth, insignificant. Not my story, I whispered, and it felt true. Later that evening, my phone buzzed, his name on the screen. For a split second, instinct kicked in, the familiar urge to answer, to make peace, to fix things. But then the truth rose up inside me, firm and steady. I didn't owe him comfort. I didn't owe him a soft landing. I didn't owe him the version of me who used to carry both our emotional weights. So I let the call go to voicemail. He called again, and again. I didn't answer. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes strength is choosing silence. I sat on the sofa and let the quiet fill the space where panic used to be. I wasn't okay, not yet, but I wasn't broken either. I was changing slowly, painfully, but undeniably. He left with the idea that he still had options. I stayed with the truth that I finally had a choice. Later that night, I turned off the lights, crawled into bed, and lay in the darkness. The side of the bed where he used to sleep looked untouched, almost unfamiliar. But for the first time, it didn't make my chest tighten. It didn't choke me. It didn't make me feel abandoned. It just was. A space, a vacancy, a beginning. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would be hard. The day after would be hard. Healing isn't linear, and I knew that. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't waiting for him to come back. I wasn't clinging to the past. I wasn't trying to rebuild something that was already ash. I was standing in the ruins, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I reached over to the nightstand, picked up both rings, and placed them inside a small box. Not as a keepsake, not as a wound, but as evidence of a moment that changed everything. When the lid clicked shut, something in me clicked shut too, the part that had been holding on to hope that he could be who he used to be. He couldn't, and I no longer needed him to be. I set the box aside, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark. For the first time in a long time, I felt like something had ended fully enough for something new to begin. Not tomorrow, not next week, but someday, and someday was enough. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. These moments, the heartbreaks, the revelations, the quiet truths, they can shape us in ways we never expect. If you found something in this story that touched you or reminded you of something you've lived through yourself, you don't have to carry it alone. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comment section.